So, not too long ago, we learned that Netflix, of all companies, was going to be buying up Warner Brothers. Crazier still, we've now learned Paramount is launching open war to try and steal it from under them, and at this point, us peons do not know what's going to happen. To me, based on what we've been seeing out of both companies recently, this is a whoever wins, we lose situation. But everyone has their own opinions on what the best outcome will be, and it's not like Warner Brothers has been handling its own IP all that well anyways. Personally, as much as I love a lot of those IPs, my opinions are firmly entrenched in what will be the best option for how DC Comics and adaptations of those characters will be affected. And though I have no real hopes about Paramount, the more I think about what'll happen if Netflix does win, the more I get the familiar sense of existential dread fans nowadays are so used to. But instead of making an unhinged, disjointed, and borderline psychotic video of me just screaming at every shadow I see, I've compiled a nice simple list of 4 of the biggest red flags I'm seeing that if Netflix does cannibalistically consume the willing corpse of Warner Brothers and absorb all of its IP into itself, that as far as DC is concerned, we could be fucked. Starting with the fact that Netflix already bought out a comic company to use as an IP farm, and so we've seen how this could potentially go, with my first red flag being completely wasting Millarworld. For those of you who don't know, Millarworld was an independent publishing imprint set up by comic superstar Mark Millar, known for popular comics like Old Man Logan, The Ultimate, Civil War, and more, to publish his own original comics while retaining ownership of the stories and characters. With comics of his like Kick-Ass, Wanted, Kingsman, and more having their rights promptly sold to Hollywood, and leading to incredibly successful movies, regardless of their adaptational accuracy, leading to his name becoming a huge ping on the radar of the creatively bankrupt, soulless hacks who run Hollywood. He continued to create interesting new comics out of this imprint, most of them well received, like Nemesis, Superior, Jupiter's Legacy, and more, with Hollywood studios often paying for the rights to turn his stuff into movies before they'd even come out. And no one in the business is hungrier for a constant stream of new content than Netflix. And watching companies like Warner Brothers and Disney turn their comic universes into content farms, they had an idea. Instead of getting into bidding wars for this guy's ideas every couple years, why not just buy his entire company? Giving the guy a steady paycheck to just keep doing what he's doing and automatically having the rights to make shows or movies out of whatever gets popular next, as well as to get access to the back catalog of IP that's already been successful when the film rights run out. That was back in 2018. There are around 18 separate IPs Mark Millar's created under the Millarworld banner that have not yet been turned into movies, with 8 of those having been created under Netflix after they acquired the company and are therefore 100% and arguably theirs to adapt. And how many adaptations have we gotten so far in those past 7 years? 3. Hey, 3 out of 8? That's not bad. Hell, 3 out of 18 is okay. That could be a lot worse. But one of those was American Jesus, where they completely dropped the American part from the story, based it in Mexico, renamed the series The Chosen One, and filmed the entire thing in Spanish to target what they perceived as a more traditionally religious audience, despite the original being specifically written for and about the religiously waning American audience. The second was an anime series you've likely never heard of because they didn't bother to advertise it at all in Super Crooks, and the third now was Jupiter's Legacy, which was canceled after only a season because of a mismanaged budget and behind-the-scenes disagreements. And that's it. Well, okay, but let's see what we have coming up in the next few years as adaptations of Millarworld comics. Let's see. Oh, hey, a Super Crooks live-action series? Let's go. Oh, no, wait, no release date and likely canceled. All right, Magic Order. That was an awesome one. And James Wan attached? Sweet. No, production was canceled. But hey, it started back up with a new creative team, and nope, looks like it might be stuck in development hell, as we've heard very little for years, and there seems to be a lot of behind-the-scenes issues. A Hawk movie? Cool. I really like it. Oh, no, now it's a show. All right, well, whatever. No, we haven't heard anything about it in years, so seems like it's also stuck in development hell. A Prodigy movie. Cool. That's been in production for like 6 years, so likely development hell as well. Reborn. Sweet. That was such a cool one. Wait, Sandra Bullock playing the lead? I don't know about... no, the whole thing's falling apart and is now also stuck in development hell. Empress. Not his best comic, but the idea was strong. They could... Nope. Stuck in development hell. Space Bandits? I legit didn't even like that one. But I'm just glad to have seems like any indication that that one's even still in production has just disappeared. Okay. Then apparently there are also Sharky the Bounty Hunter and Nightclub projects in development, but we've heard almost nothing about them, and I will not be surprised if in a couple years I see those titles with the goddamn words development hell sitting right next to them. Okay, so what the hell did Netflix even buy here? Apparently just the rights to waste money paying people to have to develop shows and movies that never go anywhere and fans never get to see, with the ones that do get out either changing the entire purpose of the story or never even being advertised. But that doesn't friggin' matter, because Netflix did not buy Millarworld to give us a bunch of awesome shows and movies based on his work. Sure, that'd be good for them and all, but for every Millarworld show in development, there's 100 other Netflix shows in development. Unlike traditional TV and theatrical movies, Netflix doesn't need that many of their shows to succeed, or even fully get made. They just need a handful of successes to get enough people to sign up for their service in order to fund all of the projects that went nowhere and never found an audience. And to do that, Netflix seems to have taken a throw as much shit at a wall and see what sticks approach, with the constant stream of new Millarworld comics sadly just being another glob added to that pile of shit. So just the mere potential to have shows made of his shit is one of the reasons that they bought Millarworld. But there is another, much more insidious one, and that is to take that potential away from other streaming services. Of all the independent comic creators we've seen in the modern day, virtually none of them has been as successful at writing comics that get adapted into successful projects as Mark Millar has. Not only were Wanted, Kick-Ass, and Kingsman all incredibly popular, but Civil War, Logan, and elements of adapting the Avengers into the modern day were all taken from his work as well. Something about his writing both appeals to general audiences and is fairly easy for studios to use as a template to adapt something not really similar at all, but successful. It was inevitable studios were going to continue to offer him piles of cash for the rights to his work, only now it'd be for the streaming rights instead of the theatrical rights. A Reborn series on Apple TV+, Empress on Paramount, Prodigy on Hulu, Magic Order on Amazon Prime. Any of these could be the next potential hit, and every single one could advertise from the crazed mind that brought you Kingsman, Wanted, or Kick-Ass to catch viewers' attention. But not anymore. Netflix took care of that by buying the whole thing. So should we assume that they're buying Warner Brothers for any other reason? Yeah, the cost is massive, but they're literally killing a major competitor in the streaming space while also stopping any other competitors like Paramount from absorbing Warner Brothers' catalog of content into themselves. Netflix is at the top of the streaming wars, but if all the other major entertainment companies consolidated together, as we've been seeing them do more and more recently, Netflix would be effed in the A. Buying Warner Brothers gives them a lot more power in the constantly changing entertainment landscape. It limits the amount they have to spend licensing content from other studios by having the huge Warner Brothers back catalog of beloved shows and movies. And sure, they can develop shows and movies based on those properties when they want to, but more importantly, Paramount Plus can't. Jupiter's Legacy was an awesome comic. It told a generational superhero story that challenged the ideals of the bygone era of superheroes against the nihilistic resentment of the modern day. If Netflix had given it the proper attention and focus it needed, it could have easily been a huge mainstream hit. It had insanely high viewership at first, despite the low level of advertising, showing that there was a lot of interest. But due to mismanagement behind the scenes, the show is a disparate clash of conflicting ideas, varying levels of understanding of the source material, and a budget that ballooned so high Netflix basically just canceled it before it even aired. This is just how Netflix does things. They just toss a bunch of projects out, see which ones make it to completion, and then see which ones resonate and immediately cancel any that don't. They don't give a shit about any of these stories, characters, or creators. As long as the couple that do get popular retain or bring in enough subscribers to fund all of those failed projects and make a profit, they're happy. Jupiter's Legacy got some people to subscribe for at least a month or two. Chosen One seemed to do pretty well. So as far as Netflix is concerned, all the projects that never went anywhere are an acceptable loss. Hell, maybe they can give Jupiter's Legacy another try in 20 years. It's not like it's frickin' going anywhere. This is what I expect to see out of DC adaptations going forward. Greenlight 50 shows starring these characters, none of which are taken all that seriously or tied together at all. See which couple even get made or get popular, likely barely even resembling the characters they're based on, and then cancel them the second some analytics says less people are subscribing. Then rinse and repeat for the next 100 years. And that's if we're lucky enough to even be getting new content with these characters out of Netflix, as the easiest way to get people to subscribe is to give them something familiar. Leading me to my next red flag, the inevitable return of the Snyderverse. After Netflix gets hold of Warner Brothers, how long do we think they're going to keep up this charade of releasing theatrical movies? Gunn's DCU is built around big-budget theatrical movies, and though Superman did alright, it didn't break box office records or reignite love for DC worldwide. We'll see how Supergirl does, but I'll be surprised if it does substantially better than Superman did. So, how much does Netflix actually care about the DCU? How invested are they in Man of Tomorrow or other future DC projects? How interested are they really in DC heroes on the big screen in general? I'd say it's not a big part of why they're buying out Warner Brothers. Netflix only cares about one thing and one thing only: increasing the number of people subscribed to Netflix. They do that in many ways, but one of them is to rescue canceled TV shows from oblivion if Netflix deems that there are enough hardcore fans who will subscribe to watch more of them. We got this with insanely popular cult shows like Arrested Development, Lucifer, Cobra Kai, and many more. And as dedicated as all of those fan bases are, can you think of a fan base more dedicated and ravenous than any other ever seen for the thing that they loved that was cut short to continue, who are still talking about it on a daily basis to this day, with that thing being solely owned currently by Warner Brothers? Yeah, I'm talking about Snyder Bros. We laughed at them when they said release the Snyder Cut, but they got it released. We laughed at them when they started saying restore the Snyderverse. We laughed at those with hopes that Warner Brothers would let Netflix continue that story when Zack Snyder started doing projects for him, as it seemed an absurd, even moronic hope. And yet, here we are, in a world where that seems like not only a possibility, but almost an inevitability. Likely not the same stupidly massive theatrical budget Warner Brothers tossed at it, but a cheaper, more bare-bones version like we saw at the tail end of the Snyder Cut between Batman and Joker, to at least finish the story. I could see Cavill being up for it despite his bad blood with Netflix, even if just as a fuck you to Gunn for replacing him. Gadot might be getting desperate enough to come back. Nothing Ezra Miller does seems to be enough to get him kicked out of Hollywood, so why the hell not? And Affleck? Hell, they got him to come back at the end of the Snyder Cut despite him claiming he was done with that shit forever, so who knows what could happen, man? Personally, I am not a fan of the DCEU. In fact, you could say I absolutely hate it and Snyder's vision for DC. But I do not hate the people who love it. I respect anyone who deeply loves a fictional world, and I respect their passion to fight for what they believe in, even if we're on opposing sides. And I am happy that they got the Snyder Cut, and even thought it was objectively better than the theatrical version. However, the day the last DCEU movie bombed and the whole thing was officially over, I was much happier. The decade we spent in the DCEU, and specifically Snyder's version of it, did irreparable damage to the public's perception of the DC universe. With the bright, hopeful, valiant, optimistic heroes of DC being twisted into dark, violent, hopeless, depressed, mean-spirited, murderous versions of themselves. I totally get why DCEU fans love these versions of characters, but as a DC Comics fan, I cannot friggin' stand them. But why should I care? I don't believe even a little bit that Netflix would just outright replace either the current DCU or whatever version of DC they make for themselves with a reborn DCEU. I think Netflix will realize what all these movie studios don't. Only nerds care about maintaining one specific continuity, and a one-size-fits-all shared movie universe will inevitably alienate a lot of potential paying subscribers. Multiple projects to cater to specific niches out of DC will likely be the way they'll go instead. And that sounds all good. Who doesn't like being catered to, right? But there's one problem. When they bring back the DCEU, it'll mean Netflix is okay with continuing one of the biggest issues that killed it in the first place, which was adapting these characters in name only, and twisting and changing everything into whatever random-ass form the people making them want them to be in. As I said, I respect you if you're a Snyderverse fan, but do not claim that the movie versions are representative of what they've been in comics for decades. Warner Brothers dropped the DCEU because they knew it was negatively affecting public perception of DCEU heroes, and making it seem like they were only catering to a specific niche audience of people who love dark superheroes. And that if these characters were going to continue to thrive as they have for the past 80 years, some quality control was needed to portray these characters in a way that's kept them as popular and iconic as they still are. If Netflix brings them back, when Netflix brings them back, it will be because they don't give a shit about maintaining any kind of public image for Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, or any of the DCU heroes. And the more you twist and break characters into random shapes, the more they lose what makes them so unique and interesting. Maintaining a relatively streamlined version of characters for decades across multiple continuities while still keeping them fresh and interesting is hard, but rewarding work. And while Warner Brothers completely dropped the ball the last decade, I expect Netflix to care even less about the work that would take. And why should they care? Because leading into my next red flag, Netflix ain't buying Warner Brothers for DC, man. DC adaptations, specifically on film, have been floundering the last decade. Due to mismanagement, constantly shifting leadership, and behind-the-scenes fights on a constantly shifting creative direction, the DCEU is an unsatisfying mess as a shared universe, even to most people who loved it. And though Superman did okay, let's not pretend it made the kind of money or gained the kind of cultural awareness that would make someone like Netflix be aching to buy out the DCU on the ground floor. And we already have out of Netflix's own mouth what it thinks the value of DC even is. From Netflix's own press release on the sale, This acquisition brings together two pioneering entertainment businesses, combining Netflix's innovation, global reach, and best-in-class streaming service with Warner Brothers' century-long legacy of world-class storytelling. Beloved franchises, shows, and movies such as The Big Bang Theory, The Sopranos, Game of Thrones, The Wizard of Oz, and the DC Universe will join Netflix's extensive portfolio, including Wednesday, Money Heist, Bridgerton, Adolescence, and Extraction, creating an extraordinary entertainment offering for audiences worldwide. This tells us two things. One, that their main drive to buy out Warner Brothers is for their back catalog to add to their library of shows and movies without having to keep paying licensing rights. So, though they definitely will, making new content with what they're buying is not even their main goal. With them even saying later in the release that gaining this vast library will likely save the company at least $2 to $3 billion a year on licensing. But two, and more specifically related to this video, it tells us that they consider the entirety of DC, not just the DCEU, not just the Arrowverse, animated universe, or even just the comic universe itself, but the decades of stories, characters, comics, movies, shows, games, lore, world building, and passion artists, creators, and fans have put into making this gigantic franchise. Everything it's become is to Netflix at about the same level of importance as The Big Bang Theory, Bridgerton, and Adolescence. That is worrying. Lumping all of DC in with other random-ass shows and movies, no matter how popular they are, shows us that Netflix doesn't consider DC a huge part of the reason they're buying this thing. But if it was just that little paragraph, I wouldn't think that much of this. The next paragraph is the one that makes me start worrying. By combining Warner Brothers' incredible library of shows and movies, from timeless classics like Casablanca and Citizen Kane, to modern favorites like Harry Potter and Friends, with our culture-defining titles like Stranger Things, K-pop Demon Hunters, and Squid Games, we'll be able to do that even better. Together, we can give audiences more of what they love and help define the next century of storytelling. There are two red flags here. One, modern favorites, and you notice what's missing. People can act like Superman was incredibly successful, but if it were in Netflix's eye, it would be in that sentence. Instead, they have Harry Potter and Friends. Friends because people still spam that show like crazy to this day, but also to be able to list off two different franchises they were acquiring without overshadowing the one they really wanted investors to notice when reading this thing. One of the last big moves Warner Brothers did to entice this sale was to get a new Harry Potter streaming show set up and ready to start filming. If Netflix buys Warner Brothers, they also get an already well into production and advertised Harry Potter series to get made and toss on their platform exclusively. And they put Harry Potter next to something innocuous like Friends here, so it would really stand out. Because it's one of the most valuable franchises they'll be buying the rights to make content of. The other aspect is that while DC was placed with moderately popular Netflix shows like Bridgerton, Harry Potter gets the all-star treatment, being compared to some of Netflix's most monstrously popular franchises like Stranger Things, K-pop Demon Hunters, and Squid Games. The way DC is positioned in this thing shows us that Netflix sees some value in it, but not the way Warner Brothers does, where they've been trying to make it a pillar of their movie plans for years now. It's mostly valued for its older content as something to fill up Netflix's library, which I assume specifically refers to the CW shows, as those always did well on the platform. And that DC is not specifically being positioned as one of those franchises that can, quote, help define the next century of storytelling, which is bullshit. Remember, these aren't just written by some intern. Every single paragraph, word, and comma is put together specifically by a team of press release professionals and lawyers to portray an incredibly precise and specific narrative to the public and investors. They want investors feeling confident and safe in this merger, and apparently portraying DC as a huge gain for the company is not the way they believe that they should do that. When Warner Brothers started trying to get all of their shit together a few years ago, they listed three major pillars of content they wanted to focus on: the wizarding world of Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and the DC Universe. These are what they saw as their most potentially valuable and important franchises that they need to use to get the company back to profitability, or enough so to be up for sale again at least. Netflix has a different opinion. They don't even reference Lord of the Rings, because Amazon already has the streaming rights to make incredibly crappy shows based on it, and they don't care about making movies, so not out of that one. DC is relegated to a list of many other random IPs they have access to in their back catalog, with only Harry Potter being given a spot where it can even really be noticed amongst all these IPs. And though Warner Brothers has been trying to expand the Harry Potter franchise out beyond the story of the original books for years, and finally found some success in doing so with fans embracing Hogwarts Legacy, that actually leads me to my next red flag, and it's the one that most people are talking about when worried about this buyout. Netflix only gives a crap about streaming. Hogwarts Legacy was a huge success. The people behind the game put a lot of work into giving players the feelings of being at Hogwarts and recreating the sense of magic and whimsy that has made the books and movies so insanely popular. It's introduced an entirely new generation to the franchise, creating lifelong fans who will read these books, but more importantly to Warner Brothers, continue to buy and watch the old movies, as well as to try out new content they create. And though WB Games has had a lot of misses recently, they did find great success here. And we know exactly what Netflix feels about Warner Brothers Gaming division when one of Netflix's co-CEOs answered a question about acquiring Warner Brothers Games in the sale, to which he responded, we actually don't attribute any value to that from the get-go because they're relatively minor compared to the grand scheme of things. And later he continued, now, we are super excited because some of the properties they've built, Hogwarts is a great example of that, have done quite well, and we think that we can incorporate that into what we're offering. And finish later with, so we think there's definitely an opportunity there, but just to be clear, we haven't built that into our deal model. Which I'll translate from corporate speak into friggin' English as, we don't give a shit about some little gaming studio, bro. We tried getting into the game streaming thing, no one give a crap, so we're just focusing on streaming shows now. Maybe we could do a Hogwarts Legacy like streaming show at some point, but I don't know. Maybe we'll let them keep making games, maybe we'll shut them down. We haven't decided yet. Netflix's priorities for buying Warner Brothers is for the potential streaming content. They're not as committed to being a multimedia entertainment juggernaut as Warner Brothers was. And though what we've been getting out of WB Games for DC stuff recently has consisted of the underwhelming, like Gotham Knights, to the straight-up garbage, like Kill the Justice League, I think a lot of us think that all that's needed is a change in leadership to people who understand what fans love about these characters, worlds, and about video games in general. But we now know that that leadership ain't going to be coming from whoever they send over from Netflix, because it's not something they're even really talking about right now. So what does any of this even mean for DC? Well, for the movies and potential shows, likely not that much. Though I worry about the quality, consistency, and output of DC content based on what I've said earlier, they will definitely continue getting something DC related out onto their platform. But for the comics, this tells us something worrying. If Netflix isn't really discussing or thinking that much about what they can do with something as big as WB's entire gaming studio and its many, many subsidiary developers, to the point where they state it's not even a factor in buying Warner Brothers, then we can be damned sure that they aren't talking about such small fish as Warner Brothers' teeny little superhero comic publishing company either. As in, the entirety of DC Comics. So once they own it, what are they going to do with it? Well, at first, likely nothing. Just keep things going, business as usual. Maybe start having the Millarworld comics be published under DC. Maybe step in here and there to tell creatives what stories they want them to tell to later develop into movies the way Disney has done at Marvel. Little things that may be interesting or could suck ass, but that's really the way it's always been at these companies. But for how long? The weekly comic shop model is already having problems. Sales are down due to the same kind of mismanagement that's affecting every other industry. And American comics are having more and more trouble trying to keep their cultural footprint compared to the ever-increasing popularity of manga. DC Comics will likely never be closed down, even if comic sales continue to struggle. It's proving that having a place to continually and relatively cheaply mine out ideas that can be adapted into shows and movies is too potentially profitable. These corporations can see what'll work for a few pennies of art and writing, and then cherry pick out the best, most successful elements to invest hundreds of millions into bringing to people in live-action blockbuster fashion. Hell, just new stories coming out about Batman alone is incredibly valuable. But that's my point. To have new Batman stories being published, does Netflix even need a DC universe? Does continuing decades of continuity that's been built upon and maintained since the 30s really matter outside of that little continuity fans like? What does a monthly comic publishing cross-canon schedule achieve that having a couple artists and writers publish a couple standalone graphic novels a year doesn't? We've already seen Hollywood is always eager to adapt out of continuity or retconned aspects of characters and stories anyways, as we see with the influence of the Ultimates on the MCU Avengers, or just using the New 52 Shazam or Justice League Origins when making those movies. Does this multi-generational form of storytelling really matter for getting out new ideas that can be adapted into movies and shows? I, of course, would say, hell yes, it absolutely does. For one, it's part of what keeps these characters so incredibly popular, because when done well, it feels like you're following their ongoing story across your entire life. And two, because I think adherence to continuity brings out a creativity in writers that leads to some of the biggest, craziest, and most unique stories that have ever been written, because they could only exist in this one specific time period, in this one specific world, with these specific versions of these characters. It's a fascinating form of storytelling that's created stories like the Infinity Gauntlet, Civil War, Spider-Verse, and many other comics that have inspired incredibly successful movies that would not have ever been created or thought up otherwise. But here's the thing. Warner Brothers and Disney have two major reasons to continue things as they are when it comes to comics. One, they're multimedia companies. They want you watching TV at home, but they also want you going out to the movie theater, shopping for toys and merch at the store, going to theme parks featuring their characters, and also heading out to comic shops to buy new issues, graphic novel collections, and more. Netflix is just a streaming company. They want you doing one thing, watching frickin' Netflix. They've already stated that they believe the theater model for movies is outdated, which is convenient because it's what benefits their business model the most. There's literally no incentive to Netflix for you to ever go outside. So why continue to help prop up the brick and mortar store business model by continuing to publish weekly comics anyways? Especially when it's becoming more and more of an uphill battle to do so. And the second reason Warner Brothers and Disney have incentive to keep things going as they are is financial. They bought Marvel and DC to publish and make money off of their most iconic characters. If they're not constantly trying to make as much money as possible by selling tickets in theaters, toys, merch, and comics, then they would be wasting one of their assets that they specifically purchased. The streaming side of things is just their newest way to try and make money off of these universes. For Netflix, they're not buying DC. They're buying Warner Brothers, which happens to own DC, just to add their collection of franchises to their streaming service to save $2 to $3 billion in licensing a year, and to develop new shows and movies based on those assets to host exclusively on Netflix. That incentive to monetize non-Netflix versions of them just isn't as strong. And I fear it will lead to one of two outcomes for DC Comics long term, both of which will suck horribly. The first is that DC will become a limited series publishing outlet akin to Millarworld. You'll have a few Batman comics published every year, maybe as 5 issues, maybe as just a graphic novel, each of them a template to turn into a show or movie later on. No real adherence or care to continuity across them. Then maybe they'll put out a couple Superman, Wonder Woman, Flash, or whoever graphic novels every few years when they want some ideas to work with for upcoming projects. And we maybe once in a decade get a story about the Teen Titans or Swamp Thing when they're thinking about maybe doing a project about them, and that's it. Or my other major worry is that they just stop physical media altogether and start publishing new comics entirely digitally straight to Netflix. This would suck for 3 horrible reasons. One, I, and many others, love holding a physical comic in our hands while reading it. It's hard to explain the joy in doing so, but if so many of us didn't want to, we wouldn't continually waste $4 on a teeny little pile of paper every week for the experience. 2, one of the biggest things that brings comic fans together and keeps passion alive in the fandom is the secondhand collector's market. If you get rid of physical comics, this entire thing dies. Cons, comic shops, everything will dry up and die even faster than it is already. And third, DC Universe Infinite, DC's current online comic streaming app, tried doing digital-only comics a few years ago already, and it gave us beloved classics like Aquaman, Yo-Ho, Hold Onto Your Hook, My Little Warlord, and who could forget nothing but Nightwing, and many more. Even with how bad some comics can be, none of these would ever been allowed to reach comic stands because they obviously would not sell. And if somehow they had made it to the stands, all of them would have been canceled almost immediately due to predictably low sales and sheer fan disinterest. They would not have reached the 20-some chapters many of them got on that app. But that's the difference between companies that rely on individual sales and companies that rely on subscribers. With sales, you have to really think about what your target audience wants to see so much that they will pay you money for it. with the goal of making everything you put out good enough that people will buy as many issues as they can possibly afford. On the subscription model, you don't need to do any of that crap. You only need one thing people are willing to pay for, and then there's no incentive to care that much if the rest is any good, or is something anybody even wants to see. You can dig up cheap artists and writers and have them toss out whatever. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. Who gives a shit, as long as you have one Batman comic out worth signing up to read online every week, right? So as you can see, while a lot of other people are worried about, oh, theaters are going to go out, the model's going to change, streaming prices will go up, my worries get downright apocalyptic if you give a crap about this universe or these characters. So, there's my take on how bad things could get for DC under Netflix. But don't worry, the way things are going in pop culture, I'm sure things will become equally bad no matter what happens. So, what do you think? Any red flags I missed on Netflix winning? There's a lot more, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. Ever want to see some green flags? Let me know. It'll be hard, but if there's interest, I have a couple reasons I think maybe things could go okay. Want to see a red flags for Paramount owning DC video? Let me save time and sum it up with 2 words: Star Trek. And you know, I have it on very good authority that Netflix has said that for every one of you who clicks that subscribe button down there, they're 100% more likely to not only preserve this universe with love and care, but also adapt whatever your personal favorite character is that Warner Brothers been wasting into one of the greatest movies or shows ever made. So I think it's something you should consider.